Heribert Lange, One Last Café. Kim, Between Love and Murder, novel. Part 1. How it all began. Chapter 1. On the way to London.
The sun was already a hand's breadth above the horizon, and the morning had lost its innocence. Traffic was packed tight on the small street below my window, and the first wisps of smog were already dimming the sunlight. Seen from the 9th floor, an endless stream of motorcycles crawled along, tiny as ants in the distance. Only occasionally did larger beetles mix in among them, buses, trucks, and here and there a few cars. Everything flowed toward the city. The workday was beginning in Saigon. I love this city, where you could feel Vietnam's leap into the future, almost even more than Mui Ne, which was my birthplace and the home of my parents and ancestors. Saddened, I looked at the ticket lying on the table, my last vacation day. I had already booked the flight back to London. It was set to depart tonight. I glanced at the small mirror on the wall and looked at myself. My thick, dark hair was disheveled, but the tiredness was still firmly set in my brown eyes. I am Vietnamese, but the years as a constant observer and my discerning nature had sharpened my features. A slight tension played around the corners of my mouth. At 5'9" with an athletic build, I looked in the mirror almost more alert than I actually was. Decisively, I pulled off my sleep pants and stepped into the shower. The lukewarm water quickly lost its temperature and revived my spirits much faster than expected. I quickly stepped out of the now too cold stream and hastily dried myself off, while the warm air from the open window was already warming me up again. I let my gaze sweep around the hotel room. Had I forgotten or overlooked anything? The suitcases were packed, the laptop stowed away. I promptly called the bellboy to bring my luggage downstairs. Fully dressed, I headed down and ordered one last café Sueda, the delicious coffee with sweet condensed milk over ice. I took one last walk through the neighborhood and had a small meal at the street food stall where I always liked to stop by. Today I felt like pho. It was prepared here with a lot of love and was extremely tasty. As usual, I was served by Luen. I waved him over to my table and pressed 100,000 dong into his hand, and he disappeared to the other side of the street. He reappeared a few minutes later, placing the contents of 3 small plastic bags now arranged in a bowl on the table. Naturally, I let him keep the change as a tip. Pineapple, mango, melon, dragon fruit, and mangosteen, ready to enjoy. For that alone, I love Vietnam. The indispensable plastic bags aside, 100,000 dong is not even 4 euros. In Germany, many a Vietnamese would have to shell out half a month's salary for a bowl of fruit like that. I savored the fresh fruits and decided to come back here as soon as possible. A taxi ride in Saigon is a test of patience. You usually spent more time standing still than moving, and the snail-like crawl often did not even live up to that. So it was almost a miracle to have reached the airport on time. Everything else was practiced routine, even the on-time departure shortly after midnight. Time flew by, or in flight, time passed, across the time zones as well. Ever since I had made it a habit to fly first class, I could sleep without any trouble. So it was that I arrived at around 7:20 on September 30th, 2025, with a slight delay, in the capital of the British Empire, or what was left of it.
Chapter 2. London.
My sister called me and told me she was almost there, and that I should wait for her at the McDonald's across from the Premier Inn, London. After the third coffee, Suzanne came rushing through the door, hair flying, and spotted me right away. We embraced. "How are you?" we both asked at the same time, then burst out laughing. It was wonderful to see her again. She had now been in London for nearly 6 years. Well, that's where love takes you. Sunny looked stunning at 27. She still wore the same small gold chain and her ever-present stud earring. My older sister was the picture of modesty and truly had no need for jewelry. Her radiance drew everyone under her spell, including James, who had met her and fallen instantly in love at a theatre performance at the John F. Kennedy School in Berlin. 5 years later, they had moved here to London to take over the inheritance, that is, the business and house of his parents, who had tragically lost their lives in a shipwreck in Indonesia. James took care of his father's law firm from then on, while Sunny, she was called that by everyone because Suzanne sounded terrible in English and Susan was too ordinary for her, took care of the house and the now 3 children. The family lived together with James's paternal grandparents in the large house, so it was never lonely or quiet there. And Sunny always managed to find a little free time when needed, including to pick me up from the airport. It took us less than an hour in her car, a somewhat aging Bentley Turbo R, to reach the house in Hampstead Garden suburb in the north of London. What an unexpectedly boisterous welcome awaited me as an uncle when I stepped out of the car. Not only the whole family was there to greet me, but also the household staff and the cat. Only the goldfish had stayed inside, though I admit that the only fish I know are the ones you can buy frozen or in a can, and I am not entirely sure it was actually a goldfish. I barely had a chance to catch my breath that day. My nephews Tick, Trick, and Track claimed me immediately. Naturally, only I was allowed to call them that. For everyone else, they were Oliver, Noah, and George, each 2 years apart at 4, 6, and 8 years old. The 2 older ones had already been born in Berlin, and George in London. So they grew up bilingual, switching languages day by day, from German to English and back again in alternation. The 2 older ones had even picked up a few words of Vietnamese, just like my half-sister, who out of love for me had mastered that language almost perfectly. We played hide and seek, which the large garden with its many bushes practically invited, and kicked a soccer ball around. After lunch, which was prepared by the housekeeper, we all went out together through autumnal London. After dinner, James lit the fire in the sitting room and picked up his guitar. The whole family was very musical, and Sunny's voice was heavenly. Our Suo Gun would be worthy of any concert hall. After that harmoniously fading evening, I was more than tired and fell asleep immediately in the guest room. The following day, we took a boat trip together on the Thames. From this vantage point, you experience the British metropolis in its very own and special way. On Thursday, I was sentenced to visit the zoo with Tick, Trick, and Track. Children love zoos, and I am also very fond of animals, as long as they are not blood-sucking insects and their relatives. Anything poisonous or otherwise unpleasant receives no special attention from me either. I am particularly fond of bears, lions, tigers, elephants, of course, and monkeys and sea lions and whatever their kind are all called. The children could barely be dragged away from the monkeys, and the penguins delighted their hearts, while they paid not the slightest attention to their uncle, the ducks and geese. All too soon, the falling darkness brought the visit to an end. That evening, I had to put the children to bed and lulled them to sleep with gentle guitar chords and stories. Downstairs by the fireplace, we rounded off the evening with wine and seafood. On Friday, the staff had the day off, so Sunny took care of the kitchen while I enjoyed the mildly warm autumn breeze in the garden with the children, likely drifting over from the Gulf Stream. In the afternoon, after a leisurely lunch, the children were shipped upstairs to the grandparents to give us a little peace and quiet. I entered the living room and looked at my brother-in-law. I could clearly see the small gap between his t-shirt and his pants. He had put on weight. I sat down beside him, took another look at his stomach and remarked dryly, "You've gained weight." He looked at me somewhat taken aback and nodded. Then he turned away and immediately changed the subject.
How was your vacation in Vietnam?
You know I love the land of my ancestors. I always enjoy being there. It was a lot of fun again, and I got some good rest. Besides, people still eat healthier there than here. With another sideways glance at his stomach. Our eyes met, and James looked over at the television on the wall opposite, reached for the remote after glancing once more at the wall clock, and said deadpan,
It's time for the news. I can't miss that.
He turned the set on with the remote. I got up and went into the kitchen. My sister had already been trying to get the chaos under control that the meal and its preparation had caused. The dishwasher had already been loaded, and she was just starting it. The fine china was set aside. That needs to be washed by hand, I realized immediately. While she put the leftover food away in the refrigerator, I set about washing up and carefully separated the dirt from the dishes. I then placed the clean dishes in the sink filled with clear water and watched my sister at work. It did not take long before I had finished my work, and my sister came over to me, removed the dishes from the sink and placed them in the drying rack. But she immediately reached for a dish towel to prevent any water spots on the fine china.
I envy you.
She remarked as she did so.
You are still an excellent homemaker.
She said appreciatively. Yes, I know.
You are still not married.
I know. And you know I am particular. And in Vietnam, I am not yet allowed to marry. And here in England, the men are simply too cold. She acknowledged this with a nod.
What about the ones in Germany?
I left that question unanswered and left the kitchen, leaving her to put away the rest of the dishes, as I was not familiar with how things were organized in her cupboards and drawers, and went back to the living room. The half-hour news was by now almost over, and the anchor was just switching to the weather report. Late summer, autumn weather. Nothing of the typical English fog, no. Sunshine and pleasant temperatures awaited us over the coming days. I looked forward to walks through the sun-drenched, colorful woods. But things were to turn out differently. Saturday was chosen as a family day, and James's grandparents would spend the day with us, while the children were to spend the following night in the neighborhood. To avoid a potentially tearful goodbye, I would set off for Berlin very early Sunday morning, and be on my way by the time the children were due home around noon. James's parents had perished in a shipwreck in Indonesia in 2020. At the time, the news never made it to Europe. Only the major disaster off Bali in July 2025 made the headlines and caused a media stir. James learned of it days later through the embassy. Even back then, the grandparents, that is, the parents of James's father, were already living in the upper floor of the house. They never wanted to be a burden, and so one only saw them when there was a formal invitation. They had their own access via an elevator and a separate side entrance to the house, and the staircase was used almost exclusively by the children. So it was that I was now meeting these two for the first time and had to submit to their questions. They asked how my vacation had gone this time, whether I had met a pretty Vietnamese girl, or whether I would prefer to set my sights on English or German girls. At this point, Sunny stepped in with the remark,
Give him a little more time before he ventures into the uncertain harbor of marriage. He's only 23 years old.
Thanks to this interjection, I was spared having to provide further details. I was happy, however, to talk about my mother and father, and about their worries. I spoke about my work, which was more of a hobby than actual work, and talked about Eddie and Olga. Later, the conversation inevitably turned to politics, a subject that usually led to no common consensus and therefore had to be steered back into calmer waters time and again by the two women with patience and persistence, as the saying goes. The only thing everyone agreed on was the insufferable succession of Charles III. Monarchy is no longer what it was or pretends to be. Being an expensive, powerless filler for the tabloids is hardly the fulfillment of any state function. If they can no longer govern anything, they might as well abdicate. God save the king, though whether the devil would let him go is another question. I spent these wonderful days with the family, and naturally had to recount much of my vacation, which now came to a definitive end with these days, which is why I made my way back to Berlin, not without leaving behind the promise to stop by again soon. Not wanting to drag out the farewell endlessly, I took a taxi to the airport. What fond memories came flooding back, as this was already my 16th visit to the Thames. The flight to Berlin was a hop, skip, and a jump, and so I was soon home.